much indeed. Let's talk about things of a different nature, though. The Bibas family funeral was held yesterday. Shiri, Ariel and Kafir Bibas, the two children and their mother, buried in a single coffin in Israel, in front of a crowd of what looked like several hundred very respectful mourners. Yesterday evening, Paris, the Eiffel Tower was lit up in orange, as was the Empire State Building, as was the Brandenburg Gate, as was indeed a bridge in Budapest in Hungary. In London, however, we didn't apparently decide commemorating that awful event was worth doing, and instead we got Sadiq Khan unveiling the Ramadan lights, which I think is about the third or fourth year in a row that he's done that. I think they do it down in the Strand. I think that's where they were last year. And you just wonder, you know, what is it about Sadiq Khan and Britain that can't recognise a tragedy that's happened in Israel?
Well, we know why that is, don't we? And, you know, it's a horrific story what happened to them. And for us not to be able to mark in a small way with lights, to commemorate and join in the global commemorations
children being
like
murdered,
that. Right? You know, we get lights put up on the London Eye and elsewhere for gay pride. Yeah. You know, when it's the Bangladesh's national holiday was celebrated with lights and so forth here as well. Even the smallest events, somehow there's some commemoration of them. Yeah. Far too many, we think. Then when you get something so pivotal that's united the world in a horror about this, nothing happens. Instead, what do you get? You get things like, you know, this BBC documentary on Hamas and so forth. You get him, you know, we get this chap just this week had the Israeli flag and the Union flag ripped out of his hands,
I saw that,
walking through the streets. And of course you have to wonder whether this is part because of the Labour Party's desire to win back the Muslim vote that they lost at the last election. Of course there are now 5 MPs with the Muslim vote, and it's almost as if they're scared to in any way cause offence to the Muslim community, even if it means causing huge offence to the Jewish community.
Yes, indeed. And then we get that donut, Gary Lineker, getting himself back into the mix, because we know he's now leaving the BBC, not soon enough as far as I'm concerned. He and I think 500 other people wrote a letter to the BBC condemning them for pulling this Gaza documentary, which, as we've previously worked out, is not a documentary. It's a piece of Hamas propaganda, basically, because they used the narrator, a 13-year-old boy called Abdullah, whose father is in Hamas. And basically they're trying to make out in this letter that, well, he's not a terrorist in Hamas, though. He's a government minister in Hamas. And you're kind of going, what sort of naivety would you have to have? What sort of childlike understanding of politics in the Middle East would you have to think that you can be in Hamas but not be a terrorist?
Well, I mean, you just have to look at who signed the letter to understand this. I mean, it's a rogues gallery of deluded lovies. Yeah. You've got Gary Lineker, you've got Miriam Margolyes, Anita Rani, there's someone called Khalid Abdallah, I've never heard of him, and then to wrap it all off, the king of them all, Ken Loach. Yes. You know, if Ken Loach is saying something, he's obviously out to lunch and it's wrong. Yes. And quite frankly, you know, to interview in this documentary the grandson of the Hamas founder, and not reveal that information. Right. And then I just saw a clip on the internet yesterday, actually, of some Muslim woman speaking, and the translation, according to the BBC, was that so-and-so was engaged in fighting Israeli forces, whereas the Telegraph translation said this person was a member of Hamas fighting against Jews for jihad. For jihad, And you just think, gosh, the level of disingenuousness to do that, and duplicity in the BBC.
Well, they've actually changed the words that people have said, which immediately, for me, makes it not a piece of journalistic work,
pure propaganda.
Not a pice of documentary footage, but actually just pure propaganda. Absolutely unbelievable. Also, one of the cameramen that was used for it was an enthusiastic supporter of October the 7th and the Hamas attacks. And even worse than that was that one of the people who's in it as well is this guy who keeps appearing in all the Hamas propaganda videos as you know, doing various different things. One he's a farmer, another one he's he's a doctor.
He's in hospital.
I think he's been driving ambulances. You know, it's all. I mean, but he appears in every single piece of Hamas propaganda, and he's in this. You know, so that tells you an awful lot. It's absolutely incredible. Just for good measure, the Telegraph's got another piece about the BBC today. Apparently, they're now paying the Taliban to broadcast in Afghanistan. I mean, is there anything these people can get right? I mean, at what meeting do you go to at the BBC and somebody says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay the Taliban, basically, to broadcast the BBC. And they'll no doubt probably convince themselves that this is by way of spreading the great BBC work to people who perhaps are downtrodden.
If there's one thing they need to have in there is Woman's Hour.
Yeah,
people
and Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who for the Taliban.
But
come on.
Yeah, it's because, you know, the Taliban have banned foreign media. But with this deal, basically, the BBC is going to be paying the propaganda arm of the Taliban. We're going to be funding its propaganda outlet so that we can bring them Gardener's Question Time or whatever we're doing.
Unbelievable. I mean, some of them, some of the money apparently goes to house equipment and to keep it sort of secure. But it sounds to me like a bit of a sort of demanding of money with menaces, no doubt. You don't pay terrorist organisations in order to gain access to their country, do you?
Well, and also you know that the Taliban are going to be listening to this to make sure nothing is said that criticises them.
Yes.
So what is the point of something if you're not actually going to try to convert people to your message?
Yeah. It is incredible, isn't it? Here's what a BBC spokesman said. The BBC is editorially independent throughout its programming. Irrespective of the language service, it remains the only international news media organisation still broadcasting inside Afghanistan. Well, maybe it's time they stopped spending money by broadcasting inside Afghanistan, because if they were supposedly doing any good, how come the Taliban are in charge? If the spreading of the great word of the BBC is supposed to safeguard the populace of these countries, how come it's not working?
Well, I would support it if they could send out Lineker there to host Jihad Drive Hour or whatever they have.
Absolutely, or cricket, in fact, because Afghanistan seems to be quite good at cricket. They managed to beat England at it yesterday. Let's have a look at a couple of other stories on the front pages as well. Royal Jar Wars. It's a different one, this, on the front page of The Sun, just to get away from the more serious political ramifications of most of the stories this morning. The Princess of Wales got in a sticky spot by inadvertently starting a jam war with Meghan Markle yesterday, and she told a young fan about her love of making plum preserve and promised to give the recipes out for free. Now, Meghan, of course, has run into even more sticky quicksand with her new business venture, because every time she thinks of a name for it, the name's been taken by somebody else.
Exactly. And she's come out now with the ingenious name of As Ever, which is the most ridiculous name for... it sounds as if it's full of preservatives. It's going to last forever, this product. But yes, so as always, our glorious Princess of Wales inadvertently showing up the Duchess of Sussex by offering to give out her own jam recipes for free, rather than having to waste all this money to support the lifestyle of the Sussexes in sunny California.
Yeah, they started off with American Riviera, didn't they, as a nickname for their Santa Barbara.
That failed the trademark.
That failed the trademark thing. And now As Ever is going the same way, because apparently there's a Chinese company that's got that name on a clothing brand, and there's another American company that uses it as well. So she's not going to be able to use As Ever. It's
going to be called Not As Ever.
Not As Ever, yeah, absolutely right. And apparently one of the things that she's going to be selling are mixes for bakery goods, cookie mixes, biscuit mixes, crepe mixes, and these are all trademark applications that she's made in the last couple of years.
Well, this was always her goal.
How the mighty have fallen.
This was always her goal. She always wanted, essentially, to become part of the Hollywood A-list, joining up with, what's
sort of Martha
Stewart and that Gwyneth Paltrow and her candles and everything else. She never cared about monarchy. She just used this as a springboard, and now, of course, she's got what she wants, but the problem is nobody wants her products.
I know, absolutely right.